I didn't realize that.
That's an interesting question.
I've never heard of it from that
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about
I think you need to come over, stand in my shoes.
Agree to disagree.
This is Top of Mind. I'm Julie Rose. Hello. It's good to have you with us. Today's bonus episode from the archives hits really close to home for me. It's about caregiving. So for the last several years, my siblings and I have been transitioning into more hands-on caring for our parents. It's something we always assumed would come. More than 20 million Americans are currently caregivers for a parent, after all. But so much about this whole thing has surprised me. How unprepared we've been for some of the really tough conversations we've had to have. How hard it is to maintain the positive parts of a parent-child relationship when the dynamic is flipped and now the child is caring for the parent. There have also been some really tender mercies, too. Ways that this new relationship with my parents and the ability to care for them has really blessed my life. I'm so grateful for that. But I could really use a handbook. Zachary White actually felt the same way after his mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer and he became her caregiver. Donna Thomson became a lifelong caregiver the day her son, who's now an adult, was born with cerebral palsy. The two of them, Zachary White and Donna Thomson, have written a book together called The Unexpected Journey of Caring. It is the handbook I needed, and I was lucky to get to speak with them both back in 2020. Here's our conversation. Donna Thomson, hello. Thank you for taking time today.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here.
And Zachary White, thank you for your time as well.
Thanks, Julie.
I should also mention that you're a professor of communication at Queen's University of Charlotte. You research caregiving in your professional life. But I want to start personal with you. What was it about caring for your mother that you felt so unprepared for when it came to you?
Well, ironically, Julie, at the time, this was some 20 years ago, and I was getting my PhD at Purdue University in communication. So of all people, I felt I should be most prepared for a situation that, as you say, so many people face. But this became profoundly real to me when, in the course of diagnosis of brain cancer and then the treatments of radiation that went on after that, there was the death diagnosis that so few of us kind of have a firsthand view of, and I was, like anyone would be in that situation, shocked and dismayed and overwhelmed. And I was even more shocked by the family and friends, all well-intentioned, and the medical establishment who kind of dissipated into the background after the promise of recovery was taken from us. And I was moved by the people who walked into our lives at that time. For us, for my mother and my father, it was hospice and the whole ecosystem of care of people who believe that compassion and care need not always be synonymous with cure. And Donna and I often talk that the most difficult thing to accept and reconcile as a caregiver that oftentimes scares other people is that to be in the company of someone of which you love dearly but cannot change their situation. And in many ways, being a caregiver is countercultural. It scares people because you are telling stories and living a life that not only represents major difference for people, but it threatens their own assumptions about what is possible and their own threats of mortality and the idea that we can love someone so dearly and desire them to get better, but that desire doesn't necessarily change the trajectory of the outcome of their experience.
The ways that really challenges your relationships is an important part of this journey, something that I think a lot of people are surprised about, as you were. And so we'll spend some more time talking about that in a moment because I think that's an important thing to help caregivers prepare for and figure out how to navigate. Donna Thomson, so you've been a caregiver for your son. He's an adult now, right? Your son, Nicholas?
Yes, he's 31 now.
Okay. And you also write about how you were you helped care for your mother before she passed away at the age of 96.
That's right.
And so contrast for us a little bit the difference in caring, being, basically a permanent caregiver for your son, and then also being in Zachary's situation of a suddenly caring for your mother, but you knew that was going to be temporary because she would pass.
Yes, that's right. It's funny though. My mother started needing care, I guess round about the age of 85 or so, where she began to be more frail. She needed, us to begin to get her groceries, to begin to negotiate hiring care workers for her, whom she subsequently fired because she didn't think she needed them. I would say, I've often reflected, what are the similarities and differences in caring for all the people that I've had a hand in caring for over many, many years, even with my mother caring for my dad. When I was a teenager, my father had 3 strokes and lived with us at home for 2 years before he died. And so I think the common thing is that when there's a crisis, and there are frequent crises that punctuate the life of a caregiver, it's the same knot in the pit of your stomach, whether it's our son Nicholas in a medical emergency, or it's my mother being threatened with eviction for refusing to stop smoking in bed. It's so there are similarities. I think, though, where there are differences in the context of my own personal experience, the personality and the background of the person has such an impact on how they receive care. So our son has had a disability from the time of his birth, and he is the most gracious person about receiving his care. My mother, on the other hand, had a very willful and independent spirit, and she resisted accepting care.
What are your thoughts on being a caregiver to someone who resists care? I think anyone who's had even a short-term experience caring for a parent, it can be like that because you're flipping the power dynamic, right? Like they're supposed to be the one caring for you, and now they're in this area of need, but maybe they haven't acknowledged it, and but that they need the care, but like it's very difficult to navigate that. How were you able to work through that, Donna?
Yeah, it's so true. I spent a lot of time trying to hide the fact, trying to masquerade that I wasn't actually giving care when I was with my mom. And there's a story that we tell in our book about, and it's actually the story of my own mother, that when I went to an appointment with a geriatric psychiatrist to evaluate her for Alzheimer's, the doctor asked me if I was her caregiver, and my mother just turned her head very quickly and kind of glared at me. And I said, "Oh, no, I'm not her caregiver. I'm her daughter." And then my mother put her hand on top of my hand and then just raised her chin and looked at the doctor out of just looking sort of imperiously at the doctor, saying, "See, I don't need help."
Yeah. Well, her dignity, her identity was wrapped up in that. I guess it can be a very humbling, almost demeaning thing to feel like you need care.
I think, Julie, it's also the same thing in terms of most caregivers across our research of hundreds of caregivers across the care spectrum. Almost all caregivers deny or obfuscate the fact that they are caregivers because it's threatening. It's
to them or to
identity.
the person they're caring for?
Well, like in Donna's situation, threatening to her mother's understanding of her own sense of power and relationship dynamics. But also, this is not a relationship nor a role that any one of us thinks about nor prepares for because it doesn't open doors for us. We think and dream about, job occupations, about marriage, about aspirational opportunities, but we very rarely think about what it means to be with another human being in which perhaps, in many situations, the so-called costs are greater than the rewards that define most other relationships. And so it's a real conundrum we call relationship confusion because it also threatens our very sense of connection with this person. We're talking about family caregiving here. So none of us have the shield of objectivity like a medical professional might. So if we are as a parent caring for a child or a spouse caring for our partner, then this notion of our pre-existing relationship meets this caregiving responsibility, and we ask ourselves, what is happening to the way in which I connected with my loved one, the one thing that I loved about my loved one, whether it was sharing deep conversations, and maybe they're no longer cognitively competent to do that, or they feel guilty about this disparity in power dynamics. It's a real threat across the game.
Zachary White, and then Donna Thomson, I'd love for you to chime back in, but Zachary White, what's the answer here? Is it important for caregivers to embrace that I am a caregiver, this is what I am, and find some sort of hope in that? Or is it perfectly healthy to kind of ignore that, pretend that you're not caregiving and carry on a masquerade like Donna was describing?
Well, in a sec, I want Donna to talk about why the advantage of using the caregiver label as a form of advocacy in the healthcare field and in the community. I will say this, that inevitably, in an ideal world, one would be able to negotiate this relationship with your loved one. But that presumes so much. And so many of our insights come from conversations and interviews with caregivers who are caring for someone who may not be competent to have some of those conversations for a variety of reasons.
Right.
And so something simple, Julie, like giving someone a bath. If I'm a spouse and I'm caring for my loved one, my wife, and, usually kind of that intimate experience might change how I think of my wife, because no longer is that an intimate space in the way that I might have previously thought, but now I might see myself more as a nurse. And so some caregivers draw lines about what they want to do, what they can do, and what is not possible for them given the realities of how they see their relationship. But this oftentimes evolves in time.
Is it generally important or a good idea to try to maintain that mother-child relationship or partner-spousal relationship, at least, to draw some boundaries so that, or should you just embrace the, I'm your caregiver now and, you need my help with everything and we're no longer mother-child or partners?
Well, your relationship is the same and it's always different. And it becomes, if you don't recognize both, then I think that you find yourself frustrated and resentful on both sides. And so I think there are certain things that one must remain sacred in the relationship. And oftentimes we talk about those as kinds of what rituals or ways of connecting or ways of spending time with your loved one that remind you of the connection that you previously had. And as you're evolving with your loved one with care as the center of this relationship, inevitably the relationship changes. So to deny that would deny the endless responsibilities one has. And so it's an awareness of both and an opportunity to reach out to those who are doing this kind of balancing act of recognizing that they are both spouse or parent and caregiver and spouse, caregiver and loved one.
Donna Thomson, tell us about the connecting with other caregivers is something you've done a lot as an author and an activist and a caregiver yourself. Tell us about the embracing of that identity for yourself.
Well, it's been an interesting journey. I mean, one of the things that Zachary and I talk a lot about and we write a lot about is simply that caregiving and the role is full of paradoxes. It is many things simultaneously. So it's both a burden and a joy. When you are a mother and a nurse, as I was, we ran what I would describe as a home ICU
for your son.
For 23 years until he moved into a nearby care home, and now he has one-to-one, 24-hour awake nursing care. And when that happened, like Zachary said, I had to really proclaim my identity as a caregiver in order to secure support. I needed to become more and more explicit over time as my son's medical needs grew, and we would be adding diagnoses to his profile and his care needs escalated.
So you're saying that you maybe you were inclined to downplay all that you were doing for him, but in order to request and receive government support or support from the insurance companies.
And even our family.
You had to be really explicit about just how much you were doing for Zachary. I'm sorry, for Nicholas.
Yes, that's right. I did. And, at first I was very, very reluctant to do that because I felt as a mom, he's so easy. Why would I say that he was hard to look after? Why would I say that I was exhausted and falling apart from the burden of his care? I loved him so much. So I didn't want to portray him to anybody as anything but perfect. And so, but however, I began to understand that I needed to be realistic, and I needed to be explicit, and I needed to tell people what was going on in order that they would understand, and I began to value my own role as I began to talk about it more. I think we don't see care and we don't value it. And I think for many of the reasons that Zachary articulated so well, it's just that we're afraid of it, we run away from it, it's something that we would never aspire to. It's also intensely private. And so we don't talk about, except in caregiving groups. I will say that there is an exception to this rule, and people are discovering, particularly online, the safe spaces for expressing what you're feeling and thinking and fearing, and even the small celebrations of maybe something that people outside of the caregiving world would think, what, you're celebrating that? It's such a tiny thing. Mom was able to swallow a spoonful of yogurt today. It's the first time she's not choked on something in days. Something like that, something small. You can speak about it. People will understand. People will crack jokes that are black humor with you and have an automatic understanding. Whereas maybe coworkers, maybe even sisters, brothers, and members of your extended family have a great deal of difficulty in understanding what is going on at home.
And not just
they don't even want to.
Right, that's just it. Like, not just understanding, but in some ways might be sort of repulsed or bothered by you bringing it up. Zachary, you actually blogged about this exact thing pretty recently on your website. What is it about the experience of being a caregiver that makes it so hard to relate to other people who maybe are some of your closest friends and your family members?
Because it goes against everything that we're taught throughout our lives, that we're to maintain a family and friends who are great sources of social support, emotional support, and yet there's this experience of caregiving that comes upon us, that comes at us, that we talk about, that we don't prepare for it, let alone we don't necessarily know how to begin talking about it with people in our circles of social support who have different experiences than us. And so we're met with the reality of, I want so desperately my friends and family to know what I'm going through and what's happening to my loved one and what's happening to me in terms of how I'm thinking about the world differently, what it's like to be near someone who might be suffering.
But when you talk about it, what kind of reaction do people usually get?
Well, people become very uncomfortable very quickly because people don't like talking about things that don't have happy endings. People don't like listening to things in which there isn't a cure. And we're talking about chronic care situations in most situations in which people are living with realities that are not going away. They are living with realities in which they must integrate into their relationship, their ways of making sense of the world, their workplace. And so it threatens the sense of life continuing as normal. As your friends and family are planning vacations 3 months down the line, you might be a bit resentful because you can't plan an hour out of where you are, let alone 3 months down the line. The greatest gift others can give you is an openness to be able to talk about your experiences in their full breadth. Donna talked about the complexity and paradoxes of caregiving. Friends and family, if you are out there, a gift to others is to simply allow caregivers to talk about their experiences in ways that might surprise you. It isn't only depressing. It is uplifting and exhilarating. And there are things that caregivers can teach us. And to listen to someone's reality allows a sense of connection with you and the people that you're sharing with in ways that create a sense of pride and understanding and a realization that you are not, in fact, alone. But the best way to make someone feel alone, Julie, is to hand a cliche on a silver platter.
Like what?
Like God only gives us so much what we can handle. And that, well, once your life returns back to normal, this is our normal. This is our normal for a long period of time. Listen to me. Listen to how I'm changing. I'm telling you something about me. I want to see if you are willing and able to go with me. I'm not going to ask you to do something that you'll be uncomfortable with, but I do want you to go on this journey that I'm creating for you. And without me, as the caregiver creating this reality for you, you have no idea what my life is like.
Yeah. Here's how I can imagine that that exchange where Donna, you mentioned my mom's so happy my mother swallowed her yogurt today. So you text that to a close friend or a family member, someone, and as a caregiver, I imagine you're looking, you really are truly like you're not looking for sympathy or anything. Like this is. This is a bright spot in your life that this has happened.
It is exactly. What we celebrate when you're sort of in the thick of it, happiness looks really different from what it did before caregiving began.
But the non-caregiver who you're communicating that to could very easily misinterpret that and see it only as, oh my goodness, your life is so awful. And so their response could be, this must be so hard. I don't know how you do it. One of those cliches could come out before they even realize what they're saying. You're so much stronger than me. I'm so sorry things are so awful for you. And
that's right.
And then you feel more isolated because you weren't fishing for sympathy.
No, that's
or
right.
pity.
You were looking for somebody to share something really great. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
And it is it's odd. Zachary talks in the book about the masks that we put on. Zachary, maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
These masks are born out of a sense of vulnerability that caregivers are very keen and hyper-aware of how people respond to what they're saying or not saying, and that's just a byproduct of the caregiver experience. And there's 3 masks that we talk about, and real briefly, one is the saint mask. And Julie, you kind of referred to this earlier, the idea that when you tell someone that you're a caregiver, everyone takes one step back and also at the same time says, oh my gosh, you must be a saint. How wonderful. I could never do that. And while this is a compliment, it's also a recognition that saints don't have feelings. We don't want to get close enough to saints to recognize that there's human frailty there. So wearing this mask too long for caregivers can be suffocating and challenging. The other mask we talk about is the everything is okay mask. After getting feedback nonverbally and verbally from family and friends and others at work, caregivers oftentimes adjust and accommodate so much to tell the story that people want to hear, that's okay, that's digestible, rather than the story that is authentic and lived experiences for the caregiver. So caregivers give people what they want, denying their own feelings, their own experiences, their own breadth of value in terms of what they're doing. And then finally, one mask that's almost universally acclaimed is the fighter mask. Everyone loves to cheer a fighter. We're fighting. We're not going to stop until we get a cure. We're not going to ever stop. We're going to keep on going. And while this is universally acclaimed in our culture, there's also challenges because every caregiver is a person. And in between those fights, who can you turn to when you feel vulnerable, when you feel alone? The in-between areas of fights require understanding and listening too. And so there's nothing wrong with these masks, Julie. It's just the idea that sometimes caregivers get so far away from their own experiences because they are giving others what they want to hear rather than learning to tell the story of their own experiences in ways that will reach out and bridge that experience.
How can then a caregiver communicate more effectively to friends and family what they're experiencing and also what they need, what would be helpful for them as a caregiver. I think, I don't begrudge or blame family members and friends who really, they're as unprepared to support a caregiver as most of us are to prepare, to be a caregiver. It's just not something that our culture really is good at helping people anticipate or deal with. So, Donna Thomson, what's something that you did or have done to help the other members of your family understand your experience caring for your son, Nicholas?
Well, it's interesting. Asking for help as a caregiver is very, very difficult. There are so many of our cultural norms and our personal histories that make asking for help very, very difficult. So, I think of this one thing that happened to me that began my journey of asking for help, really. I was quite overwhelmed. It was just after a very major surgery that our son had had, and I was so tired I hadn't had any sleep. And my mother-in-law, bless her heart, I loved her, but she was very frightened of what was going on. And so she would say to me regularly, "Oh, now if there's anything I can do, but I'm sure there's nothing I can do." And I think she was petrified that if I said, "Oh, please come over," I'd ask her to change a surgical dressing or something. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I got so tired, and I said to her, "Oh, Jean, could you just make us a banana bread?" And she said, "I would love to make you a banana bread." It was like I had given her a gift. And I realized after that I needed to be careful about the way I thought about other people's lives, talents, abilities, and match my needs to what they could give easily. And so then, as technology evolved, I began to match the needs of our friends and family members who had offered to help with using technology tools and say, "Hey, we need a casserole on Thursday night. Can anybody deliver one?" In a forum online where somebody could raise their hand and say, "I'll help," and everyone can see that, "Oh, so-and-so is going to deliver that casserole. I'll offer to give a ride to a clinic appointment instead because I know that casserole is covered." And being able to coordinate the help of family and friends using online tools is something that's new and is available to caregivers now.
What thoughts do you have for families when a parent is aging? Often there's more than one child, and there can be some conflict among the siblings about who's going to take what responsibility, who can do what, who's available, willing, all of that. Even if all the kids really do want to be supportive, it can be very difficult to manage that, figure out who will do what and how to not have it ruin your relationships with your siblings while you're all trying to make sure that your parent gets what they need. Zachary, did you have other siblings that you had to work with as you were caring for your mother?
I did, and the reality was they faced what most others do. They were working far away and still caring from afar, but nonetheless, one of the challenges is the idea of how do you caregiving is inevitably who steps forward, and simultaneously people are stepping back. And I'd like to tell a different story that there's always collaboration, but one recurring theme that we hear is that caregiving typically is seen as an individual experience in American life, and that's not necessarily consistent with the needs of the care recipient and the kind of care coordination that Donna's talking about. But competency and proximity typically are the barriers for entry, and everyone else in the family takes a step back. And then the challenging part for caregivers in terms of their relationships with their siblings, for example, or other family members, is that the caregiver's point of view is oftentimes questioned or seen as questioned or taken as dubious or, well, that's your perspective, or are you doing it right? And someone comes in for a weekend and has all the answers when you're left to pick up what they wrought the week after. And so it's this disparity between, I have access to this loved one 24 hours a day. You come on the weekends and you have answers. Those are challenges that just don't go away, and they require ongoing understanding and, as Donna says, an ability to clarify what you and your loved one need and to be able to articulate what's going on when no one else sees what's going on.
Yeah, in a way that doesn't make everyone else feel guilty, I guess, or seem like you're blaming them, or, because part of it too, I guess, if you're the one that's there caring for the parent most of the time, you're seeing things that are upsetting or troubling. You know that something is a crisis. Communicating that to people who can't come over immediately because they're across the country can actually make them shut down because they're going to feel more bad and like they can't do anything, and it just doesn't seem like it's a winning situation.
But like Donna said, I do think that articulating what is needed and what is most valuable given your perspective and helping them understand that, and only in the way that you can because of your privileged access. This is something that caregivers have that others don't. I'm seeing mom or I'm seeing dad when no one else is, in the morning, in the middle of the afternoon, in the evening. I can account for memory loss or physical capacity challenges that no one else might be able to sense in a 10-minute phone call with him or her. And so I think, Donna, do you have any advice on terms of that ask in the family situation that might be a little bit different than friends from afar?
Right. And specifically, Donna, what's something that a loved one who is far away can do to be supportive?
One of the things that my sister and I discovered, I think a lot of this is about what you discover along the way, what's working and what's not working. My sister actually lived in the same city as my mom, so she would make very frequent but short visits to my mom. And she would bring her things she needed. But again, it was short, and I live about 3 hours away from where my mom was. And so I would drive for the day, and sometimes I'd stay overnight and spend 2 days, but a whole day with my mom. So that really was a gift to my sister, because I was able to bring my mom, and we would schedule appointments, multiple appointments, that I could do because I was staying there. And my mother loved the open-ended, long conversations, because somebody who is elderly and infirm and, losing their memory, you can't rush someone like that. And my sister was trying to work and balance lots of other things in her life, and I was never in a hurry when I came. And I'd say, Mom, we've got the whole afternoon. What would you like to do or talk about? And that helped my mom a lot, and it helped her with the whole issue of meaning and purpose in her life. I think what I was able to give her was the feeling that she was still mothering me. And she loved that, because I would ask for her advice and for her her thoughts about whatever was happening with our son, and we would Skype him. And she just felt as though she was being a grandmother and a mother, even though I was actually there to care for her.
Thank you for sharing that, Donna Thomson. We are just about out of time, but as we wrap up, I would love for each of you, and Donna, since you're speaking, we'll start with you, each of you to share something that was helpful for you in the midst of the caregiving confusion and lack of sleep and exhaustion and fear. What was something that you found helpful to do in order to maintain a sense of hope, optimism in a very difficult period? Donna Thomson.
Talk to other caregivers who were experiencing something similar. So I befriended other mothers of children with disabilities early on in our journey 30 years ago, and I'm still friends with those women. And that gave me hope that it was possible to survive this experience and to come out with wisdom and love in my heart and that it was survivable. So I think the friendship amongst other caregivers is really something that helped me enormously.
Zachary White, how about for you?
You cannot underestimate the value of what you're doing with your loved one. When I was caring for my mother, something we look forward to and a ritual we began was sharing coffee. And throughout the course of her life and death, sharing that coffee was something we both did together, and then over time, I sat near her as we shared coffee, and then over time, as she didn't know who I was, we still shared coffee. It's what I told her in the evenings. I will see you in the morning for coffee. It's what we arose in the morning to. It's what I looked forward throughout that day. Wherever you are in your care experience, identify those small moments of value. Hold on to them, speak to them, share them, and look forward to them.
Zachary White is a professor of communication at Queen's University, Charlotte. He studies caregiving. And Donna Thomson is a caregiver, author, and activist. The book they wrote together is called The Unexpected Journey of Caring. And we had that conversation back in 2020. On next week's bonus episode of Top of Mind, an entirely different way of experiencing the world, where senses blend together, so words have tastes, sounds have colors. People with synesthesia can't imagine life any other way.
They look at us and say, well, how can you enjoy music if you can't see it? How do you remember things if you can't see all the colors and shapes and movements?
That's next week's bonus episode from the Top of Mind archive. Be sure to leave a review or give us a star here on the app where you're listening to our podcast. That'll make other people want to check us out so they too can feel the power of thinking again. I'm Julie Rose. We'll talk soon.